Hi everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Hand. I'm the DevOps Evangelist here at VictorOps. And today's webinar is going to go over tips and tricks to reduce TTR for the next incident. So thanks again for joining us. We've got a great audience. We're going to get to a lot of really great information, and if you happen to have any questions throughout this presentation, there should be a section for you to put in those questions, and we'll try to address those towards the end. So with that said, we're just going to get going here. So TTR, let's do just a quick kind of definition of what we're talking about when we say TTR. Time to resolution is what TTR stands for. Now, I will tell you, I've got kind of an asterisk here. Resolution is what we call it, and that's what I'm going to refer to it throughout the course of this webinar. But a lot of people will also refer to that R portion of TTR as repair or recover. They all kind of mean the same thing. We're really just talking about getting things fixed. But for the purposes of this webinar, just to sort of standardize things, we're going to go with time to resolution. So the total amount of time that it takes to resolve an incident is the time to resolution. And of course, a lot of on-call professionals, as they try to improve their time to resolution, they start measuring that and how well they're doing over time. And really, the MTTR, or the mean time to resolution, is the metric that, by and large, most tend to pay attention to try to improve things. So with that little bit of a definition of what we're talking about here with time to resolution, let's get started on breaking down the different kind of sections of an incident lifecycle. So the incident lifecycle, otherwise known as the process through which you go about solving IT issues in real time as they happen, or as some of us who have been on call for probably most of our professional career, we call that a long night without sleep. Following an alert from once it comes in to seeing it through to resolution can be a long process. Fortunately, with the right tools and the tips that I'm about to share with you today, surviving this challenge can be made all the less daunting. So real quickly, I'm just going to kind of mention each of these segments of the incident lifecycle, and then we're going to go into each of them in depth and talk about tips on how we can reduce MTTR throughout. So we identify the incident lifecycle as starting off as the alerting phase, and then we move on into the triaging, followed by investigation, identification, resolution, and then finally documentation. So let's dig into those and start talking about it. But before we do that, I actually want to kind of do a quick poll. I'm going to go back real quick, and I want you to just take a look at these 6 phases of the incident lifecycle, and I want you to tell me which one do you think requires the most time. So moving forward into our poll here, let me pull up the voting. So at this point, you should see something on your screen that allows you to choose which one of the phases. I've actually only put 5 out of the 6 on here, but tell me which one you think takes up the most time. And the one that I've left off is identification. So I'll give you a little bit of a cheater. It's not identification. And let's give you just a few more seconds here to get some more votes in. All right, let's take a look at the results that we've got. So, about 7% of you feel like alerting takes up most of the time, followed by, looks like resolution is also at 7%. And then triaging comes in at 9%, followed by documentation. And then investigation is what you have as 44%. All right, so let's go back and move on to the next slide, and we'll show you what the real numbers are. And actually, you guys were really, really close. You had 7% in there as alerting, when actually from our investigation and our research through on-call specialists around the world, we've determined that about 5% of the time, or 5% of the entire life cycle is spent on alerting, followed by 18% on triaging. 40%, or the majority, is actually of the investigation phase. And then identification, resolution, and documentation are all kind of there really closely. So let's move on and let's talk about alerting. First of all, if you're surprised by those numbers, I would encourage you to take a look at the State of On-Call, which is a paper that VictorOps has put together. I can get that to you if you just want to send me an email, jason@victorops.com, or hit me up on Twitter at jasonhand. I'll be happy to get that to you. But it's a really great document that gives you a lot of great information regarding on-call and the state of on-call. But let's talk about alerting. So if you break down a typical incident resolution into phases, you see that perhaps surprising, the smallest portion of time is spent on the being alerted to the problem phase. On average, our VictorOps data showed that only about 5% of the total TTR has anything to do with alerting or escalation of the problems. Back in the day, the alerting phase was a longer portion of the TTR because, at that point we were actually carrying pagers. I don't know if many of you, I'm sure, remember that part of our professional careers where we actually had these little pagers that would beep, and, things are different now. We're actually using smartphones, and we can get these push notifications, and we're always sort of always on because, the technology has improved, and with WAN and LAN and SMS data, alerting and that whole alerting phase has actually come along with that. So what should we do during this phase to reduce time to resolution? Well, my man Victor here, he and I have kind of gotten together to put together all of these tips that we're going to share today. So Victor's tips on how you can reduce TTR just during this phase, the alerting phase, is first of all to use custom notifications to distinguish critical alerts. Like I said, we're not really using pagers anymore. We're using push notifications. We're using smartphones, and we all have this ability to actually create and use custom notifications. It's very, very easy to do, and something we definitely recommend, because if you're not able to distinguish some sort of regular email versus actual critical alert, that's going to slow down your time to resolution. Secondly, include useful context and content within that alert. So when you get the alert, already having information you're going to need to help dig in and resolve and triage and deal with all the other stages of the life cycle, that's going to speed things up as well. Speaking of triage, that's our next phase. This is the time that we sort of assign degrees of urgency to the incidents. It's what we call the I know there's a problem, but I have no idea who or what is affected phase. So finding out what exactly is wrong by picking up the phone to call someone that may or may not be awake or may not have the right answer obviously is anxiety inducing. But even more so when it happens at 3 or 4 in the morning. So something like a timeline that can provide a single view of all activities surrounding the incident, including alerts, paging, chat messages, and the ability to rewrite the alert to a different person or team, all of that's going to help tremendously. Also, if you can create or somehow manage intelligent routing that can send an alert to the person who knows how to fix the problem, that's going to make your triaging phase a whole lot more successful as well. So this triage phase, remember, that's 18% of the entire process. So trying to speed up this phase as well is going to help tremendously. And so let's take a look at what Victor says on his tips for the triaging phase. First of all, we want to establish a single source of truth for all activities of an incident. So, establishing that sort of timeline or some sort of single source of truth is actually going to give everybody one place to go and find all the answers that they need and learn about what's taking place, who's doing what. Also, using enhanced routing to make sure that if a database problem is what's taking place, that the database people are the ones who are alerted, and they're the ones who are actually going to be able to start digging in and taking a look at what's going on. So get the right alerts to the right people through routing. Let's move on to the investigation phase. First of all, I guess I probably should have put it in a poll here just to see who's paying attention, but if you can remember, this was the largest block of all of the different cycles or all of the different phases throughout the life cycle of incident management that takes up the most time. At 40%, the majority of TTR is spent on the investigation phase. So this is where we're really digging into the issue. This is the phase where we're going to log into our systems, we're going to start breaking down the metrics and all of the different logs and graphs, and maybe review different documentation within wikis, We'll also start discussing with our team what else is going on, what are you looking at, what do you see, have you tried this and that. This is what makes up the investigation phase. So obviously it's a very big part of the entire life cycle of incident management. And what kind of tips do we have that can actually help with this phase? Well, first of all, connect with the right resources and team members. Talk about what's going on within the timeline. Talk about any kind of extra context or content that you maybe was already pulling in automatically. Collaborate and share. If you're familiar with the term chat ops, this is where that kind of stuff is going to take place. You're going to see what commands others on your team are doing. You're going to see what types of graphs and what types of information they're out there querying. That's what takes place during this phase. So being able to connect with the right resources and additional team members, as well as having full transparency and a great space to be able to collaborate and share, is certainly going to increase your efficiency during this phase and reduce your time to resolution. The identification phase is our next stop here, and this is the part where I kind of feel like everything will be better if I just fix this one thing. So once you know what the problem is, you just need to find the answer. This is much easier said than done, of course, depending on what your company's documentation is like. Getting your hands on updated protocol might just be the hardest part of solving the problem. Remediation docs may be stored in an internal wiki, a spreadsheet, or in some cases, probably just in someone's head. But the ability to annotate alerts with links like runbooks, graphs, notes, just additional really useful content and context can actually help the problem, or notes about that can actually help that on-call person solve the problem much faster. And knowing that the solution will be easy to find is a major game changer when it comes to reducing TTR. So just having that confidence that you can find the right information, you know exactly where to go to find the steps to triage or to just start accessing different bits of information and logs and graphs, having that right at your fingertips is going to be huge. So tips that we have on that phase are providing quick access to accurate metrics and runbooks. So just being able to get to the information that has been saved and documented by other team members, or probably it's yourself at some point, having quick and easy access to that is going to help a lot. The next phase is resolution. This is the self-documenting what teams do to solve the problem phase. The problem resolution phase is perhaps the largest potential lever in a true collaborative system. To reduce TTR in the resolution phase, you need a way to self-document what teams do to solve the problem. This is, in a sense, the heart of collaboration, the ability to not only reduce TTR during the current resolution cycle, but also capture that knowledge to pay it forward next time. So by documenting or self-documenting the conversations that are being had, the commands that are being run, the graphs that are being pulled, the logs that are being reviewed, all of this different information and things that you're doing while you're fighting the fight is part of the resolution phase. And being able to self-document that is going to be huge, and it's going to help you obviously reduce your TTR now, but in the future as well. So let's take a look at Victor's tips for this section. Be vocal and share what's taking place. So like I said, be out there, collaborate with your team. You might even consider chat ops so that everyone can collaborate and share the actions that they are taking to actually fix the problem. If that's not an option yet, which some people are just now starting to kind of hear about the term chat ops and ask more questions about that. So if that's not quite where you are just yet, at the very least, communicate to others the actions that you are taking, so everyone has a situational awareness of what's taking place, and then that can be documented for later. So if I'm on my end in a completely different location than the rest of my team, and I've done something, I've taken action through a command line, I've SSH'd into a box, and I've started looking for information, I need to somehow be verbose and communicate that back to my team. Chat ops is going to allow you to do that automatically, but if you're not there, you need to at least communicate that back into your timeline or back into your war room within your chat client somewhere to make sure that not only is it documented for later, but others have that situational awareness of what's taking place. So I want to take a second real quick and do another quick audience poll. So let me pull up our voting system here. And what this one is just a yes or no question, and I'd like for you to tell me whether or not you feel your internal documentation of your processes and your procedures is accurate and is easily accessible. So go ahead and start putting those votes in now. Be as honest as you can. Give everybody just a few more seconds here. All right, let's take a look at the results. All right, so 36% of you feel like yes, your documentation is accurate, it is up to speed, and it's quickly, you can get to it quickly. It's very accessible. While the majority of you, 64%, say no. And unfortunately, but not surprisingly, this is true. This holds true for just about every company, or at least most companies out there. As hard as you work on it, as best as you have the best intentions to make sure that your wikis are accurate and that they're available and everybody knows how to get to them, it just ends up not happening. And so your internal documentation ends up sort of being a problem. So let's move on to the next slide here. Let me close our voting system. So as you can imagine, documentation is a huge, huge part of making sure that, well, obviously that the information you have to solve problems is accurate, but that you can get to it when you need it quickly. So documentation, let's talk about that phase. After an incident is resolved, on-call and DevOps best practices mandate that a blameless postmortem or a retrospective take place. An accurate, comprehensive postmortem is an essential tool for communicating with internal and external stakeholders. But more importantly, it helps prepare and ideally prevent similar incidents from occurring again. So an ideal postmortem would actually be something that's customizable, allow you to edit and add applicable notes, maybe pulling in together everything that took place during the entire incident lifecycle so that you can give additional context to the event and just sort of have this really accurate snapshot of what exactly took place while you were dealing with this incident. You want to provide an opportunity to then create a run book detailing exactly how to triage and address this incident should it occur again in the future. So documentation obviously is a huge, huge important step within the life cycle or within all these phases. But oftentimes people just don't take it as serious as they need to, and they don't document what was done. They don't give themselves an opportunity to have the right answer should this come up again in the future, or maybe you're not available but someone else on your team has been tapped to deal with this problem. They don't have the right answer. So what are some tips that we have for improving the documentation phase? Well, as we said, postmortems. Conducting a blameless postmortem is going to be huge. Those who follow the DevOps ideologies know that the postmortems must be blameless in order to fully understand the entire set of circumstances that may have attributed to the incident. It's important to conduct a postmortem, but equally as important for it to be conducted in a blameless way. You need to stop looking for that one single root cause. There isn't going to be a root cause. There's going to be a number of circumstances that may have attributed to an outage, and you need to be able to identify those accurately. So conducting a blameless postmortem is going to be huge in reducing your TTR during the documentation phase. So those are all 6 of the phases through the life cycle. I've given you tips on all of those. Actually, I gave you all sort of mine and Victor's tips on how to reduce those, but if you didn't catch them, or maybe we're going a little bit quick, I do have another slide here that we've got all of them written down. So let's go through them all one more time. First of all, we want to use custom notifications to distinguish critical alerts. You want to include useful content and context in those alerts. Establish a single source of truth for all activities of an incident. Have one place where you know that you can turn to for all of the accurate and timely information. Get the right alerts to the right people through routing or some method, but get those alerts to the right people. If I'm the network guy and that's my specialty, and I'm being paged about some sort of database issue, I'm not the right person. That's going to slow down my time to resolution. Connect with the right resources and team members. Collaborate and share. This one's huge. You want complete transparency between all your business units, between all teams, whoever is on hand to take care of this problem. You want to make sure everybody knows what everyone's doing. Provide quick access to accurate metrics and runbooks. Those runbooks are going to be huge when it's 4 a.m. and you just now are digging, sleep out of your eye trying to figure out what's going on. Having a step-by-step list of what to do during that triage phase or during that investigation phase or wherever you are is going to be huge. Be vocal and share what's taking place. This sort of also ties into the collaborate and share, but it's very, very important to just make sure everybody is aware of the actions you're taking place as well as everybody else on your team. And then last, conduct those postmortems. Try to keep them blameless. You're going to find that they're so much more useful. If you're not looking for one single root cause, the blameless method is going to actually help you get to that. But regardless, the postmortem is going to be huge for helping uncover what took place, but also how do we get better and how do we prevent this from happening in the future. And so with that said, I think that's pretty much it. I believe we have a couple of questions. I've got Tara here with me who's going to read those questions to me, and I'm going to do my best to answer them.
All right, Jason. So we did a poll of the audience talking about which phase of the incident life cycle takes the most time, but I was wondering, in your opinion, which do you think is the most important phase of the incident life cycle?
Well, they're all super important. For me, I want to be alerted immediately. I want to make sure that I got that push notification or I got that SMS. So even though the alerting phase is only 5%, if you're not being alerted or the proper person or team isn't being alerted accurately and quickly, that's the starting line. Everything else takes place after that. So if you're not being alerted in a way that you trust, in a way that is efficient, in a way that makes sense and is actually giving you great information right within the alert, I'm going to start asking questions, because to me that's where this game starts. And so although it's one of the shortest phases and one of the smallest phases of the entire incident life cycle, to me it is probably the most important, just because that's where you start.
Awesome. So we had an attendee ask a question: who in an organization typically runs the postmortem? And then the second part to that, who typically is the single point of contact during an incident?
Right. So a lot of companies will use what they call an incident commander, which is really just maybe the lead person who's on call during that time. Depending on the size of your team, some of us only have teams of 1 or 2, maybe 5 at the most. Others have teams of hundreds, and so it's going to vary depending on the size of your team and your organization, obviously. But typically, it's going to be that lead person who was on call. So the person that got the alert, perhaps, and then started moving into the triage phase, and sort of was the main point of contact throughout that incident. That's typically going to be the person that then leads the postmortem, because they were involved likely from the very beginning all the way to the very end, whereas others probably got roped in as they were needed. And so generally it's going to be that person who was alerted first. Oftentimes that person is sort of dubbed the incident commander. But honestly, it really doesn't matter. It could be someone else who was maybe brought into the fold a little bit later, but they have great information and they were able to get caught up very quickly due to your ability to have this situational awareness and be able to provide information quickly. So as long as there's somebody who is willing to sort of break down what's going on, conduct that postmortem in a blameless manner, that's all that really matters. Okay, we've got one more question here. So I'm just going to read this out loud. We've seen that most responses by technology players are rather poorly documented, and the documentation/postmortems rarely happens, and when it does, it's not communicated to management in actionable terms. Therefore, nothing gets fixed or changed. The event will repeat. What are you seeing in this area? Obviously, your statement is very accurate. like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people just don't take documentation, that phase. They don't take that seriously. Again, it's going to depend on your team. It's going to depend on your management and the culture within your team to actually seek out ways of improvement. You know, continuous improvement is something that some teams, they just don't quite really subscribe to necessarily for whatever reason. I would say that whoever is sort of your person that's conducting these blameless postmortems, they need to instill this confidence throughout the rest of the team of the importance of it. And then as a result, that's going to then spread out throughout the rest of your team, and it's going to start gaining momentum where you can then take that back to upper management or whoever it is that's sort of being the bottleneck with this process and say, this is what we found, this is what took place, we really need to address this, not only document it so that we can fix it quicker in the future, but we've uncovered some sort of issue that is, you know, potentially small now, but could grow to be a much larger deal in the future. So we really want to sit down and address this and talk about how we can improve things. I don't know if that really gives you a very specific answer. I think it does depend on your team. Honestly, if you'd like to email me, jason@VictorOps.com, maybe I can dig in and understand a little bit more about your exact situation, and I can give you some more specific advice that way.
Awesome. We have one more question, Jason. So you've talked a little bit about intelligent routing and smart alerts. How does VictorOps handle those things?
Well, as with most incident management systems out there, the alerting phase is pretty simple. You know, we can make sure we understand who's on call during what time of day, that kind of thing. But the smart routing portion is a little bit more unique. Not all systems have that. But we feel like it's really important. And the way it works is, as we receive information, we call it the payload, from your monitoring service. Within that payload, there's going to be fields. There's going to be key values in there that we can actually look for. And so when we're able to identify that perhaps a problem is occurring on a specific host that is serving up, maybe it's our front-end website, we can detect that's what's taking place. It's not just some sort of failure, you know, within our overall infrastructure. It's a very specific problem, and we know based on what's monitoring it, what service is monitoring it, and also within the payload, there's going to be fields that, you know, maybe it's IP addresses, host names, things like that. There's going to be stuff within the payload that lets us key in and say, oh, this is actually a network problem, or this is a database problem, or this is something with our front-end website. We need to get that to the person who's responsible for the front-end website. You know, if we've just pushed out code and we recognize that this is something to do with the latest release, we've just pushed out, you know, our latest feature, and immediately we're seeing a problem, that's going to be likely due to that code that was just pushed. So we need to then rope in our developer who pushed that code out, because they're the one who's going to have the most intimate knowledge about what exactly just got pushed out. Your operations team, they're going to understand the infrastructure, but they're not going to understand the software that was just released out to the public. So you want to get those devs and those engineers pulled into what's going on too. And that's a big part of the debate about putting developers on call. A lot of people say, no way, I'm a developer, I have no business being on call, nor do I want to be, I'm just here to write code. Well, we understand that argument, but you're also very responsible and very much part of this team, and the code that you're writing for us that is now out being used by the public is having problems, and you're probably the one who knows how to fix it. So we want to get you pulled into this as quickly as possible. Hopefully that answered your question. Again, if it didn't, just send me an email, jason@VictorOps.com.
It looks like the last question we have is from Kurt, and he wants to know if he can access the slides after the presentation. And Kurt, we will definitely have these available as a download as soon as we're finished here.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. We want to make sure that, all of this stuff is being recorded. We'll have the slides and all of this available. I'll send out a link on Twitter, so if you're on Twitter, go to Jason, just @JasonHand. I'll make sure I get those out here this morning. If for some reason you don't see them, again, just send me an email and I can make sure that you get those. Also, kind of related to that, I mentioned the state of on-call earlier in the webinar. If you're interested in seeing that and you'd like to absorb that, it's got a lot of great information in it. Much of the stats I use for this webinar. Again, just tweet me or email me and we'll get that out to you as well. So I think with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining me. Hopefully these tips and tricks to reduce TTR, your time to resolution, has been useful, and you can apply these, moving forward. Certainly reach out to me. I love responding to questions. I love having debate on all of this type of stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out, and if there's anything I can do or if VictorOps can do to help, we would definitely love the opportunity. So with that, I will thank you, and we will hopefully talk to you again later.